Welcome to this week's episode of the Rock and Roll Ghost Podcast. This week we are proud to bring on filmmaker Joe Lynch, who has done many movies you probably have seen and liked. I'll mention all the ones I want to mention, and then we'll get into the issues perhaps with some of them. Knights of Badassdom, Everly, Mayhem, Point Blank, and now he's directing 2 episodes for the Shudder series Creepshow. The Right Snuff just came out with Ryan Quanten and Breckenmeyer, and then you've got the second one coming out this week, correct?
Yes, that's Pipe Screams, which comes out on Thursday, which is very exciting because that's with Eric Edelstein from Green Room and my kid's favorite show, We Bear Bears, but also Barbara Crampton, the queen. The Crampton Renaissance is in full effect. But yeah, it's like crazy. First off, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Brett.
Oh no, thank you. We have some. I know we have one friend in common. The other, we have another acquaintance or another person in common. But we have Adam Simon in common.
I mean, it's become the world according to Adam Simon at this point. Who isn't connected to Adam Simon, who I just saw a week ago? Like we hadn't connected. Usually over text or emails, and I'm usually like avoiding him because he's always like, come on, let's go on this one project. And I'm like, oh God, no. Like I'm never in the right headspace when he's like got so much passion and energy. Yeah. But we hooked up, not hooked up like that, but we reconvened, if you will, about a week and a half ago, and it was just so great to see him again. And now that the world's kind of opening up a little bit, you can feel a little more comfortable. I'm still on elbows and Wi-Fi's, but with masks. But it's nice. I'm glad that you know Adam as well.
Yeah. We just I've known him for a while through my association with Carnahan.
Gotcha.
And I just interviewed him not too long ago about everything he's got going on. So
cool.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Creepshow first before we get into anything past, because that's the main reason here. How did this come about? I mean, the fact that you're doing 2 episodes and they're 2 parts of it, like they're 2-parters each week. How did you come about doing 2 of them back to back?
Well, in terms of like the technical side of it, it's always good that you like when directors usually see doing TV, a lot of times they'll do 2 episodes and they're called blocks, so that you can have it just makes a much more economic workflow. The director's not going back and forth. Sometimes the director will end up, because they're like, say, on location, they'll do like episode 3 and episode 8, because it makes more sense to not like have to shuffle the director back and forth, especially since things are being shot all over the place. Right. So when season 1 was announced, I'll never forget getting a text from Greg saying, "Hey, what are you doing in February?" And it was literally the day that they announced Creepshow itself. So I'm like, whatever does this mean? But unfortunately, just due to schedules and stuff like that, it didn't work out for season 1. But when season 2 got started, I got a call, and when you get a call from Greg Nicotero, who I've known for years, but he's still, one of my heroes. He was one of the guys that started K&B and was, in the trenches in the 80s doing makeup effects with, Howard Berger and Robert Kurtzman, before there was even a K&B. So I knew who he was, and reading Fangoria, I was a big fan. I met him at the Weekend of Horrors in New York in 1990 when they were there for, I believe it was Tales from the Dark Side. And I was so starstruck because I had seen him, in Fango and stuff like that, doing stuff like Evil Dead 2, or he was in Day of the Dead. So, but then we started becoming good friends through the Masters of Horror dinners, which was always surreal to me. And he was always so nice, but we had become very close. And when he started directing episodes of The Walking Dead, we would have a dialogue every Sunday night after his episode would play and just talk about like what it's like to do that show, or what it was like to actually have, because I don't know if you've, watched the show. It's so funny
Yeah,
how
no,
you always...
I've watched. I'll be honest. I kind of started. I haven't watched most of last season.
Sadly, I had so much PTSD after Glenn's death that it was hard for me to go back. So, but up until that point, Greg would end up directing the big episodes, whether it was like the first episode of the season, or if you saw his name on an episode, you knew like, oh man, there's going to be some zombie madness, or there's, but then I found that he ended up getting more emotional episodes, or episodes that were not your usual episode. Like they were tasking him with these very complex storylines or characters, and we would go back and forth. So anyway, long story short, he called up back in February of last year and said, "Hey pal, want to do Creepshow?" It's like, what are you, crazy? Of course I want to do Creepshow. And then he sent me over the scripts, and I was super excited, and I pitched my takes. And then like days before I was supposed to leave for Atlanta, boom, the world shut down. Yeah. Which was disheartening. However, I think what was great about that was, silver linings and all, was that it allowed us to really have the time to develop the scripts, especially with Right Snuff, which we did a lot of work on, design the ship, to design a lot of the looks of it. So it gave me a nice incubation period to really kind of step up, so that the second that he said go, this was at the like mid-September, when he's like, "All right, we're ready to rock. Are you still in?" I'm like, "Oh yeah," and I hit the ground running, which was really helpful, because the show is completely supported by an amazing crew, and obviously the cast that they get is always awesome, but it's still a very what's the word? Actually, I don't want to say limited. It's just the parameters behind it. It's not a big budget show. It's not The Walking Dead, so to speak. Mm-hmm. It's a much more contained. It's a much more frugal, workflow, which means that you only have 3, maybe 4 days to shoot each episode. So you really, am I allowed to curse on this?
Oh, you're fine.
You're okay. You need to know your shit. That show suffers no fools when it comes to what needs to be gotten. And the difference between a show like that and say something that's serialized is that once they start up a show, like say, for example, Them, which I'm loving right now. But they, the pilot director who did 2 episodes, who's a DP, he did a great job, but he really kind of set the tone, the look, the feel. Sets were already built, actors are already established in their parts, so that when other directors come on, they're just kind of getting the baton. The baton is being passed, but it's already things that have been established. With Creepshow or any anthology, there's a hard reset every time. Like when I was there, Greg was just finishing up Model Kid, and the crew was going from suburban home, practical monsters. Actually, I don't know if you guys have seen this episode, but it has a scene where there's a mummy scene in a tomb. Okay. That mummy tomb was right next door to a kid's bedroom, which was right next door to our spaceship. And as one crew is breaking down the mummy's tomb, another crew is furiously racing to get the spaceship done. Right. So and there's new actors, new costumes, new everything. Everything is reset. So it's a really challenging process, especially for, all those amazing crew people who work on the show, who are all huge fans of the show. Anybody in the art department, they're wanting to put in the craziest little Easter eggs in the background because they are fans. There's an Easter egg in Pipe Screams that I guarantee no one's going to get, but there's one of the barrels from Return of the Living Dead in the background. That I didn't notice until I walked on set and went, hey, you know what I mean? So, but that said, it's not an easy process, but at the same time, you're working on Creepshow. It's a dream come true. It's working with the same palette that George Romero and Stephen King and Tom Savini and Michael Gornick that had all established back in '82.
Right.
And now we have the baton, and now it's like our turn to pay respect and make sure that the fans know that they're in very safe hands.
Yeah. You know, your episode, because I'll be honest, if I had to pick one genre that I probably am most skeptical of going to see above all, it's horror. I grew up in the 80s. Horror was a huge thing, especially, you know, with on video, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Every kid in high school was renting horror movies because you couldn't necessarily always get in to see them in the theater.
Yep.
Or they weren't playing by you, or, you know, that was the beginning of the straight-to-video market and all that stuff. But I found that there's a limited amount of horror films that I've really ever been. I'm not into the, you know how I'm sure as a horror fan you love kind of almost everything in terms of you'll.
Well, yeah, there's certain subgenres obviously, but there's a difference between, you know, very serious, very dark type of horror, you know, your Exorcists, your Omens, you know, looking later on, your Hereditaries and your Midsommars. And then there's your Evil Dead 2s and your fun movies. You know, there was that whole era of splatter in the 80s where it was like, oh, wow, like they've been able to blend not necessarily comedy, but a sense of humor, you know. And the first movie that I had ever seen do that was Dawn of the Dead. But yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, that's the thing. Horror is kind of like Los Angeles, where it's a lot bigger than it's a lot more expansive than everyone assumes. You know, like when you say horror, that means so much to so many people because, you know, somebody might, when you say horror, might go like, I love Shaun of the Dead. You know, and I'm not necessarily saying that Shaun of the Dead isn't a horror movie, but I could see that more as a comedy that uses horror tropes. But at the same time, it's still a dangerous movie. It still has stakes, you know. So horror is like, I never bemoan anybody who says that they're not a horror fan, because it's just, there's so much type of, like, if you say film noir, that is a much more specific genre that you can figure out, like, what do you like and what do you don't like. Horror is huge, you know. That's why I think the community is so much like a family, because they, you know, like, it's something that we can all in one form or another find a way into, you know. Like there is that gateway movie that gets people excited, whether it's, you know, Horror Express or Hatchet or Seven, you know, like there's so many variants of it.
Right. And I think your point is actually the exact thing with me. It's horror is a very almost like an insular community. You're either, if you're a part of that community, you could love, it doesn't mean you love every horror film. It means that you could love almost every horror film just in some way. And with me, it's like, I like Evil Dead 2. I like Dawn of the Dead. I like George Romero stuff. I like but I tend to like the higher, you know, and Exorcist, Seven. I consider Terminator and Jaws horror films because it's two creatures that will not stop until you completely destroy it somehow.
Terminator is a slasher movie. You know, it's just that Jim at the time used the code from a slasher movie and installed code from sci-fi films and post-apocalyptic films and technology, and almost hid it in what's, again, essentially a slasher flick. It's a Jason Voorhees movie, just with I wouldn't even say a bigger budget, just with a different modus operandi, if you will.
Right. But like I said, so that what I was getting at though with that is that your thing for the Right Snuff was a good intro, I think, for me for Creepshow, because it's a little more ethereal, a little more, you know, thought. It's a little more, you know, it's basically 2001 with a weird, you know, Creepshow element kind of in my head, the way I'm working it in my head.
Look, Brett, you're the minority in that respect, though, because I was terrified that people were not going to accept it, because you have fans who know the movies, who are very beholden and very strict on, like, this is what George and this is what Steven and Tom set up. And I know that there were a lot of fans who weren't that thrilled about the first season in certain respects, because whether it deviated from that or the budgets were too small, whatever. But so far this past season, with the first the first two episodes, they were very much in line with Creepshow, the Creepshow model that people come to know and love, where there's always the twist, and there's, an element of greed, karma, and revenge involved, and a lot of nostalgia. So here comes this fucking sci-fi, movie, a little mini sci-fi movie that is utter, like almost humorless. I hate to say it. I mean, if there's any humor in it, it's coming purely from character moments, or nostalgia of going like, that is a giant retro alien.
Right.
But,
right.
The humor comes from it's in between the lines, and it's not the usual, it's not playing on the same levels. And obviously the ending is, a little bigger than I think Creepshow fans are used to when it comes to the comeuppance moment.
Yes,
there's a twist, and then there's another twist, and then there's another twist. There's three. I got to admit, man, I was terrified this past, the last week, because I didn't want to drop the baton, especially when the first two episodes being so embraced by the fans, especially like hearing like, oh man, season 2's on fire. And then here comes the giant space donut, and two guys bitching and moaning in what's ostensibly a chamber piece. I was a little nervous, but thankfully, knock on wood, so far, the response has been amazing. Like, I'm so grateful that people have actually embraced it, which is what I want from anthologies. Like, that's the reason why I didn't poo-poo it when Greg sent me the script, because when I read it, I'm like, first off, the original script, and this is not to criticize Steven and Paul, but there really wasn't any snuff. I'm like, that's a great title. We got to put something like that in there. That's kind of where the idea of the videotape looping, the death scene, that's kind of where it came from, and then, installed into the ending. Yeah. But it was like the idea when I first read it, and my writing partner and I were reading it and going, what if we went with like a real retro style? We don't want to do it where it looks like Alien or Outland or any sci-fi film now, where there's digital displays and people are moving windows and stuff like that. I was like, I want buttons and levers and an idealized time when, astronauts were rock stars, back in the day, and, even before NASA hit, before we landed on the moon. And, if you look at all the movies like 2001 and back, or even a couple years after, like Silent Running or Andromeda Strain, there is an almost fantastical based version of what technology looks like back then. So thankfully, Greg, when we talked and I said, like, I want it to look like 2001 and the Andromeda Strain, he's like, great, pal, we're on the same page. Okay, that's great. I felt like that was something that only Creepshow could get away with, or maybe Black Mirror, where like the USS Callister episode, which I loved. But they're using Star Trek tropes and we're using Kubrick tropes. But again, it was a big risk, man. Like, I was really nervous, but thankfully people dug it.
Well, I just love, the story. You could sit there and say you've probably seen that kind of greed and comeuppance, before, but that's like, but the way it was done, and the fact that his, the one character, I won't spoil too much, his problems living up to his parent are so extreme that they make him lose it, and then the cost for doing that is just so insane. And I was just, when we meet the aliens, I'm like, oh my God, that is awesome. That is that's an even further throwback to, like, kind of like a 50s almost kind of, thing, which was so cool. How long? So you only had a few days to do that. How long was post?
We had 3.5 days to shoot that, with a couple hours done back in LA to shoot some more of the aliens. And then post, again, it's another kind of paradigm with TV where the director usually gets, I think it's like I'll be nice. Like, I think it was like 4 or 5 days total. No, it was 4 days. We get 4 days where they'll send us the cut. And then before it was you go in the room and you sit down with the editor and you have, between 3 and 4 days to work on the cut. And then that's it. Like a lot of times that's the next time that you're going to see it is on TV, which blows my mind. I had a director friend who did a pilot for a pretty big show on NBC. And I was like, how's it going? He's like, I don't know. I guess I'm going to find out tonight on NBC at 9:00. Like, I thought that's why people hired you, is to be able to guide it all the way through. But that's a showrunner's job. And thankfully, Greg's been a showrunner for 2 seasons now, and he's fucking fantastic in terms of just collaborating, but he also knows his Creepshow shit. So for me, it was weird because they cut everything in Atlanta to keep the tax break. So their post house is all self-contained there. So I was back here and I had to do it over Source Connect, which is so weird. If there's any editors out there, it's like as if your computer gets possessed and you're watching the screen and it's doing all
it's like calling tech support and having them take control of your computer.
Exactly. Yes. But tech support is making creative decisions along with you, which is mind blowing. But it was great though. I had a fantastic editor on this season, Christina Cromer, who has worked on other episodes, but she and I clicked immediately, and it was because I'm an editor also, and sorry if this is getting kind of like
no, you're good. You're good.
It's good that I can edit also, and I can edit on the same program because they were using Premiere as well, where they would just send me a cut. I'd bring it into Premiere, and I would actually do the notes on that version that they sent me. So if I take 12 frames off of the tail of one shot, it says take 12 frames off. Here's what it looks like. Or, hey, what if we tried this with this kind of sound effect? And then all on time code. So I didn't have to, because I've been an editor too, many times. And there's a weird feeling when you're sitting in an edit room and you can just feel the director or the producer just looking at the back of your head the whole time. Right. It's just a little awkward, not that I don't mind it, but at the same time, editors tend to, at least I do, and I know many others do, tend to like to work in an isolated form, not have someone breathing over their neck the whole time, going Nick Burns' computer guy, move, and start doing it themselves or try to. Right. So the more that I can make it easier for Christine by getting the cut, doing the notes on that actual visual cut, and then sending it back. I mean, we had a really tight cut of both pipe screams and snuff within 3 days. It was really helpful. So again, silver linings. I don't think I would have had that if I was there, because I was part of the pandemic, kind of screwed everything up and made everybody mobile. But at the same time, I think it allowed everyone to have a nice collaboration remotely. And we still came out with something that I think we're all really proud of.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people that have been trying to do this whole thing during the past year, and it's been a bit insane, quite honestly. It's amazing anybody, thank God the technology's there, because in the film days you'd be screwed.
Yeah, I mean, it's turning into a situation now where I think there's a lot of people reevaluating, even staying in LA anymore, because it used to be, well, I got to be here because at any moment I'm going to get the call and I got to go to Fox and I got to sit down with all these agents or producers or whatever. And now everyone's gotten used to not having to do that because of Zoom, like we are right now.
Right.
And remote, shooting. I mean, I've done 2 remote shoots, which is, it's surreal. But at the same time, it can be done. I think everyone freaked out at first going well, what's going to happen to set life? You know what? We figured out a way. Creepshow was one of the first shows to open up in Atlanta and be COVID compliant. So, and which, to be fair, was a little weird at first, but you get used to it. The only thing that was really weird for me was not being able to read people's faces as much. You can read their eyes. I always thought I can totally tell if we're screwed if I can look at my first AD and I can tell his eyes are going they're starting. There's a flutter. He's starting to twitch a little when I'm we only have 14 more setups and it's after lunch. We're going to be fine. I've learned that it's at least the way that I read people's faces is their mouth. Like that's where you can start to see like the DP starts to like, his lip starts to twitch when you're like, oh yeah, I want to do a one-er around and a 360 shot and all that. Now everyone gets to set and you're talking about your day and everyone's got like, all you're getting is, that. And everyone just kind of nods their heads. And then it's not until later you go, I wish you guys would have told me that, like, you were concerned that we were going to not make our day. And they're like, yeah, but I had my mask on, So that said, everyone is still being able to figure out how to still have some form of workflow. And again, looking at the way that the world is now, I think LA is going to be a very different place very soon, because there's not going to be as many people who are like staking their flag here going like, all right, I've arrived, let's make movies, or I want to be a star. Now, like, people are becoming stars on TikTok in, Omaha, or around the world. The global reach has changed. And thankfully, technology has been there to be able to allow us to communicate while still being remote and even work while being remote. Creepshow is proof positive that you can run a set safely. You can make sure that people feel comfortable and be able to still create, because that was a big question for my actors that they had was, can we still feel like we're in the moment without making it seem like I've now accommodated for a COVID scene by having two actors who are 6 feet apart and I have longer lenses on them so that you can't tell the difference. Nope. Right. We did everything very compliantly, and even post. So, it can be done. It's just, you got to figure out a way, and we evolve.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the next episode that's debuting this Thursday or the Friday? Sorry.
This Thursday. Yes. Pipe Screams. Well, where the Right Snuff was very much a throwback sci-fi. Already you're going like, whoa, with movies because I like to, especially with a show like Creepshow, I speak in cinema, like I can sit there and go, well, what about like this? Or, oh, remember that scene in Watchmen? Or it's like, oh God, yeah, there was that one cut in Ghostbusters. Like I would be able to use movies past as ways of example. So with Right Snuff, it was, okay, I wanted to look and feel like 2001 with the same type of sets from Andromeda Strain and, the same orange that Saul Bass used in Vertigo on the walls. But for Pipe Screams, immediately when I read it, one of my favorite films of the 90s, really one of my favorite movies, is the Jean-Pierre Jeunet and Marc Caro film Delicatessen, which is this weird, funky... It is kind of a horror movie, but it's also a comedy. It's also a romance. Darius Kanji, the guy who shot Seven, he was the DP on it. And that film has a very elegant way of presenting decay and griminess. There's just something that's so weirdly beautiful about the rust in that film. And when I read the script, which is about a plumber who has to fight a monster clog, that's pretty much all I could give up. But
that's fine.
You're gonna enjoy how it all evolves. And the thing that I really responded to about the story was the fact that it was very much a like a one percenters versus a working class sensibility. I always like stories like that, kind of Robin Hood-esque in a way. But to have someone like Barbara Crampton come in and just deliciously play this Karen, so to speak. Now that you can say Karen is a term. Yes. We went full Karen with Barbara, and she just ate it up.
Pity the cool Karens out there.
Well, if ever there was a proto Karen, it's going to be Victoria in Pipe Screams, and Barbara just went. She went full Karen, basically. Yeah. She was amazing. But yeah, that one is where Right Snuff is definitely a darker endeavor. Pipe Screams is a lot more fun. It's a lot lighter. It's definitely more in the vein of like Creepshow. For example, in Pipe Screams, we do have the Creepshow moment shots, the ones where it's like someone is, you know, either behind a scrim or a green screen, and they go like, oh, and they're, you know, like bright colors and weird little graphics, you know, come into the play, which was an homage to the EC comics that George and Steven loved, which is why they used it in the first one. Right. And when they didn't use it in Creepshow 2, as much as I love Creepshow 2, it's not on the same level as the first one because it doesn't feel as much like a graphic novel like those movies did.
Right.
So with Pipe Screams, I felt like this story was giving me license to have more fun, and also have those Creepshow moments in just the right spots. Like, it was fun being able to go back and like watch Creepshow and go like, why did George do that there? Why did he pick that moment to have like a scrim behind the person? Or, you know, and usually it was like these extreme reaction moments. So to be able to go through the script and go like, that's a Creepshow moment, and that's a Creepshow moment, and that's a Creepshow moment. It was great to break down Creepshow in a way. And so, and that's the reason why we deliberately didn't do that with the Right Snuff, because I didn't want to take the audience out of the spaceship in a way. So that's where like Rob Draper, the DP, who is the DP for all of the episodes, mind you. So like mad respect to Rob Draper, who is tireless in that he had to himself reset and go from, I'm lighting for, you know, a thriller today, and now I'm lighting for a sci-fi film, and then I'm lighting for a weird Euro trash film. Because if you know the film Delicatessen at all, when you see Pipe Screams, you'll be like Joe Lynch is getting sued by Jeannot and Caro for literally ripping off not shots, but the feel and the color palette are very different than even the way we use color.
It's an homage.
or is one of my favorite stories is oh God, what was it? John Landis went to lunch with Alfred Hitchcock, and they were talking about Dress to Kill, and Landis was asking him, "Are you going to go see Dress to Kill? I mean, it's practically an homage to your work." And Hitchcock just deadpan says, like, that's not an homage, my dear boy. That's more of a fromage. I'm like, oh, man, damn it. I always liked using so now it's better if you say, like, it's a love letter, if you will.
A love letter, okay.
But the movies that inspired Pipe Screams were Delicatessen, like I said before, Evil Dead 2 in terms of just, like, the lighter tone and the more gonzo kind of camera work. With the Blob and The Hand, you know, those were some of the, and a little bit of Barton Fink in there too, especially with the some of the color palette stuff, and even just like the hallways and the room itself. You can practically like feel the wallpaper peeling off of the walls in the background. But to be able to use those as a way in for my crew, whether it's the DP, the costume designer, the production designer, even the cast. Like when I got to tell Barbara and Eric, like especially Eric, since he's the star of it, you know, I want something that feels like Ash from Evil Dead 2, where he is more of a working class schmo. You know, he's not he wouldn't call himself a hero. He's definitely fallible, and he makes mistakes along the way and could even be considered goofy at points. But he's earnest, and he's doing it, you know, for hopefully for the right reasons. And, you know, like it's like if you take comic relief and thrust them into a lead position. So that, and when I said that to Eric, it all snapped for him, you know. So it's great. It's great to be able to use cinema in a way as proofs of example, as reference points. And when you have people who can be on set and go like, oh shit, you're pulling a hand right here. Okay, I totally got it. I know what you're looking for. You know, it's great.
It's Eric is sorry. I forgot when I looked it up. What
Eric Edelstein.
Okay. Where have I seen him?
You know, he is. I think the thing that most people know him from would be he's the big bouncer who gets the X-Acto knife like up his stomach in Green Room. He's terrifying. Like you've seen him in tons of other stuff.
That's right.
And he's great. The thing that I I really fell in love with him from was my kids watched this show called We Bare Bears, which is this great show on, I think it's on Cartoon Network. And it's about three bears that are just kind of hanging out, and they're on social media. And it's a very modern show that both kids and adults can watch. And I became obsessed with this show. And I remember hearing his voice going, I know that voice from somewhere. So I looked him up. I'm like, that's the bouncer from Green Room? Dear God. So I had him on our podcast, The Movie Crypt. And he was just the nicest dude in the world. And, it happens a lot where, especially with that show, when you meet people that you've never worked with before, but you just like their work, so to have the ability, I'm sure like yourself, to be like, I really like that person's work. I want to reach out and have a conversation with them. Yes, it benefits us both. Sometimes they get to promote something. So, it becomes content for you. But in the end, when you have a good conversation with someone like that and you sit there and go, why aren't we working together? Right. Sometimes it gets awkward where they're like, oh man, when are we going to work together? And you're just like, But with Eric, I was so enamored by him. And then it just so happens that the script for Pipe Screams landed on my proverbial desk. And then when I read it, I went there is only one person for this job, and it's Eric Edelstein. And it was tough, I'll be honest. And this is something that I might post this week with all the promos for Pipe Screams coming out. But when I mentioned this to Greg and the network, sorry, Eric, if you're listening, but they went, who? I get it. It's with a show like Creepshow, they want to make sure that they have, your Ali Larders and your Kevin Dillons and those people that or Breckin Meyer and Ryan Quanten, people that you go I've seen them in other stuff. I really like them in other stuff. And, they're bringing their cachet and their audience to this.
Right. At the very least, we know that it's just not a bunch of nobodies. And
and now that said,
gives somebody an inroad into, I'll check this out.
Exactly. And I think that's really smart. That said, there have been so many times in that show specifically where we would have to cast locally. And I think just because there is so much work in Atlanta between all the Marvel movies and all the movies that get shot there and the regular TV shows that get shot there, so many actors who you've seen in so many things are really cornering the market there because they're getting a lot of work because the work is there. So Selena, who's in Pipe Screams, she's our third lead. She was in WandaVision. And I remember watching WandaVision going, oh my God, there's Selena. Or Gabrielle, who was the mission control operator in Right Snuff, is in Falcon and Winter Soldier. Yeah. So all the local talent has been amazing there. But I really wanted Eric. And we had to go through the motions of you got to consider these names. I'm first off, none of these fucking names are going to do this. I'm sorry, but Timothy Oliphant is not going to do Creepshow. No. I love him to death, and I knew maybe he's a fan, but I don't have the favors to.
Timothy Oliphant's agent isn't going to let him do Creepshow.
Exactly. But now I got lucky with Right Snuff, where I had already worked with Ryan twice, and we had such a fantastic time doing that he just said, say the word and I'm there. And then I'm really good friends with Brecken's brother, Frank, who was on our show. And I just said, hey, do you think that Brecken would be into this? And he's like, oh my God, dude, we love horror movies. We love Creepshow. Let me ask him. So it was favors that I had to pull with that one. Even Barbara and Eric themselves, they did not want to fly in October. I get it. Yeah. I didn't want to fly in October. I was seriously considering getting in my car and taking a few days and driving over. Yeah. So long story short, I had to shoot a screen test for Eric. And I did it on my own. Greg didn't ask me. I just said, you know what? The only way we're going to make this happen, dude, is if you just come to my office, let's shoot 2 scenes. And then let's put it together and then I'll just send it. And maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I mean, if we had not done that, he wouldn't have been cast. But the fact that we took the initiative, put it out there, Greg was they were really, really blown away by his performance. So he's in, and he is amazing. I cannot wait for people to see Eric in this, because I think he's gonna get a whole new audience base, I think, from this, because he really is. He did such a great job. I got really lucky with both casts.
Cool. Well, let me. I want to ask you like one more question, Creepshow related, and then we'll kind of get into some other stuff. And
sure,
I won't take up too much more of your time.
No, it's all good.
The main thing though was to discuss Creepshow, because that's what you got going on right now, and hopefully when you got something else coming up next, we'll be able to go back into whatever that is. But you've worked with Ryan now 3 times. How has that relationship evolved since Knights of Badassdom?
Well, when Ryan first walked in for Knights of Badassdom, I knew him as Jason Stackhouse. So right. I was blown away because he didn't have the Southern accent. He had an Australian accent. So I was already like, oh, this guy's good. You know, like I know, like it's like common that like Australian actors have a great knack for getting rid of their accent and making it seem like American or Southern or what have you. But I always liked him on that show. And honestly, Ryan and I were in the trenches together on Knights of Badassdom, and it was a horrible experience. And yet we became really good friends out of it. And I honestly, I felt so bad because he's the hero in it. And I wanted him to kick ass and take names. And, you know, this was at a time in his career where he was getting, you know, lead role things because, you know, hot off of this great HBO show. And I felt like I fucked that up for him a little bit by this movie that got taken away from us and totally raked over the coals and recut and remade and shoved out into the world. Now, that said, there's plenty of people who like that movie, and I've come to the point in my life where I just go like, great, awesome, you know, not sitting in there for 45 minutes and go, let me tell you how it was different.
Yeah, because I read up on the controversy. I watched it for the first time last night, and after reading some of the stuff, I'm like, yeah,
you get it, right?
But God, that first like half especially is still cool.
Well, that's what that actually was closer to the original film. The second half, when we start getting into more of the special effects and the VFX and like the gags and a lot of the beats that were all set up in the opening and don't really pay off in the end. I mean, the ending is completely different in the original cut. They just went, we don't want to spend the money on the effects. Hey, we saw Animal House. Let's just slap on some title cards at the end. It's heartbreaking.
Right. Yeah. But once I got to that point, I'm like, yeah, I can see where definitely
it was rough. And I felt terrible, you know, but we still became friends. So like we were still very close friends out of everybody in that cast. And, you know, and I've been lucky enough to, you know, work with some of them again and, you know, and hang with, you know, some of them, but Ryan and I had a real connection. And then right after Nights came out, I got offered this opportunity to make like kind of a fan film for Adi Shankar, who had done the Dirty Laundry short with Tom Jane. That Phil Joanneau, who did 3 O'Clock High, directed. So I was like, this could be cool, but I want to do something different. And he wanted to do something in the Spider-Man universe. So I'm like, what if you took you took Venom, the character of Venom, and you took the not obscure, but like the cult hit Man Bites Dog and smushed them together. And he was like, I don't know how that's going to look, but I'm intrigued. But we need someone that can play him. And you know, he's not exactly the type based on the way that, like, say, McFarlane and, you know, Eric Larson back in the day when they were writing or drawing Venom back in the late 80s. I wouldn't say that was necessarily the archetypal look, but there was something that I noticed whenever I had either seen Ryan work or on set of Nights. There were moments where I'm like, God, I would love to see him play a bad guy or just something like darker. And he had done this movie called Red Hill that I actually introduced at Fright Fest the year that it played because he couldn't show up. And he was great. He's not the bad guy per se, but he plays it a lot more serious and darker than I had even expected. And there was something behind his eyes that was always intriguing to me. So I called him up and said, hey, you know, there's no money involved in this. You'd be doing me a huge favor. But would you be interested in playing Eddie Brock in this short? And I sent him the script, and he knew Man Bites Dog already. And he was just like, wherever you need me, I'm in. and we shot that over the course of like three or 4 days, like over weekends and stuff like that. And then I cut it myself, and then we put it out. We premiered it actually at Comic-Con. And the best compliment I could have gotten was that Ryan was like, I'm getting calls for jobs that I don't think I ever would have gotten because I played this part. You know, I'm not saying like, oh, you're welcome. But I think both of us were pushed. And at the same time, we didn't have anyone telling us like, we had, I had full creative control. Like Adi was the one who put up the money. And the only thing that he asked for was to be in it. Because that's his thing. He's also an actor. And I'm like, well, it's your money. So, you know, like, okay, I'll figure something out. And at one point, I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, but there's a post-credit scene because it's Marvel. So it had to do a post-credit scene. And if you know Man Bites Dog, there's this famous scene where the serial killer who's being followed by a film crew runs into another serial killer who's being followed by a video crew. And the serial killer, who's very, you know, debonair and charming until he's killing you, asks that crew, oh, what are you guys filming on? Video. What are we filming on? Film. Oh, and then shoots all the video crew. And it's one of the gnarliest black humor comedy moments I think I've ever seen. And I loved it. So I thought, what if we do it? Because in the short, it's Eddie Brock is the one being followed by a film crew, and then at the end you discover who he really is. But we had this like deleted scene where Eddie runs into another crew who is following another Marvel character. Originally, and up until maybe the last 2 days before we shot it, it was going to be Thomas Jane as the Punisher, because we had that connection with Dirty Laundry. And the whole point of that was I was going to give Adi the part of the director of the other crew. Gotcha. So, and he was like, perfect. That's great. That's the kind of part I want to do. I love it. And then at the very last second, Tom bailed because he had another job. He had a paying job. So I can't promote for that. Right. Yeah. And I got lucky enough where I had asked my friend Derek Mears, who has played Swamp Thing, who has played Jason Voorhees. He's one of the nicest people in the world. I said, listen, hey, you know, like, what do you think about possibly being Bullseye? And that made sense because Bullseye, the character, was in Daredevil, which was in Hell's Kitchen, which was in New York, which was part of the Spider-Man universe. So it made total sense. So Derek came down, I drew a fucking bullseye in his head, and we were ready to go. But that was the extent of like, if I wanted to do this and have full creative control, I had to relinquish something and, you know, like, or, you know, give something back. And by making that scene and allowing Adi to be in it, and he's really funny, by the way, it allowed me to just kind of do my thing. And it's arguably the thing that I'm possibly most proud of, because it was just such an amazing, fruitful experience. And I got to watch my friend just fucking kill it as this character. And to this day, I still get people saying like, oh, it's the best Venom that's ever been on there. And I wouldn't necessarily completely disagree, because I love Tom Hardy. And I'm really excited for the sequel, but that's kind of the Venom that I wanted, the Eddie Brock that Ryan played. And then since then, we've always been trying to find something else to do. I tried to get him in Point Blank, and he was too old to play Grillo's brother, or it just wasn't right for that. Mayhem just didn't feel right because obviously, you know, just Steven had that part. So we're always looking to work together again. And then when I got this script, originally the original cast that Greg wanted, and it was one of those like, I got to make a couple phone calls, was going to be John Bernthal and Steven Yeun. And like, he's like, all right, you call Steven, I'll call John. And I'm like, they're not going to do this, man. Like, maybe John but I know that Steven, I think at the time he might've been shooting Minari at that moment. So I knew he just wasn't available. But in the end, you know, like, I can't see that segment without those two dudes. You know, like I think Ryan, there's a moment in the short, it's the moment where the door closes and Brecken's on one side and Ryan's on the other. And Ryan walks up, and it was one of those serendipitous moments that you think that you're going to plan, but you never do. But Ryan walks into the light and then out of the light. And somehow he found like a dark spot in the lighting and he looks freaking terrifying in it. I remember getting chills on set, and it's so hard when you're going that fast to be able to stop and smell the roses. But that's a moment where I almost like stopped everything in my brain and went, and there it is. There's the moment. There's the moment where the audience is going to go, he gone crazy. So, you know, like, and you don't have that without having the kind of relationship, you know, and I'm not saying like, oh, go out and make friends, you know, like good friends with actors, you know, because it'll yield benefits later on. You can do that if you want. But he and Brecken, you know, who I'd never worked before, but we quickly, you know, became, you know, collaborators very, very fast. There's a trust involved, especially when you're going that fast. And I knew that they knew their shit. They knew that like what I was preparing for every day, and I gave them the berth to be able to try a couple things. And I'd say everything that they tried is in the short.
Yeah. Yeah. And him making that decision and doing that actually shows his talent, you know, obviously, because he was able to see something nobody else even was.
Yeah. And that's the thing. There were so many beats that were in the Paul and Steven script that, and maybe it's just because like you start to conceptualize things, whether it's on paper or when you actually see it being played out. There are moments and beats that I never realized until I was watching these two actors do it. You know, there's a moment where they're on a TV interview, and I think it's even in the script once that Alex Ryan's character like kind of chimes in because he's kind of relegated to the sidelines because Ted is the one that made the gravity wave, and Alex is just kind of in the background going like, "Oh yeah, that's what we did." You know, things that happen in interviews or even like in engagements with other people when someone feels a little slighted, they try to interject themselves into it. It didn't really resonate on the page, but when you see these two actors doing it, oh man, it was just like, it was delicious to watch.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That it was a very, like I said, I was very pleasantly surprised, not because I didn't think you couldn't pull it off, but because I wasn't sure what to expect at all.
I don't think anybody was. Neither was I, to be fair. When I saw the first cut, I was like, oh shit. Yeah. Like this is wow. Because again, we're moving so fast. I didn't really have time to step back a little bit. So watching that first cut, I was terrified because I'm like, there's no Creepshow moment, and it's in space, and all the effects. Of course, the effects weren't done until last week, like not finished. That's how fast they were moving. I mean, I think this has more visual effects than any other episode in the season, but that's purely because we're dealing with a dark void and we're dealing with space and there's miniatures, and you know, it was more than I'm sure they expected at first. But so that's what makes it even more nerve-wracking when you're watching this thing over and over again and all you're seeing is green screen. It takes you out of it. So watching it last week for the first time, like on the big screen, when I went to Adam Green's house and we watched it on his huge screen at the office, I was seeing shit I'd never seen before because it was either on the day on a little monitor or in the edit on a tiny little compressed screen on Vimeo. There's facial tics that I didn't even notice that they were pulling off, or like, wow, Brecken didn't shave that day. Holy shit, I can see into his pores. So yeah, it was a very surprising experience, and hopefully, you know, it still resonates with people.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about these anthology things is because it's not like a series or a movie where you're going to get hammered with everything about it. It's that you're walking into something as cold as you possibly could be, unless you're
and you know what? And if you don't like an episode, if you don't like an episode this week, guess what? There's a whole brand new one right after. Like we had done. Adam and I had done an anthology called Chillerama, almost 10 years ago now. And that was the thing. Like, we wanted to make sure that all the filmmakers were given as much creative birth as possible, for better or for worse. But we also knew that, like, look, if you don't like Wadzilla, you never know. You might, like we're going to change gears completely, and then you get into werebears. And if you don't like werebears, then guess what? Diary of Van Frankenstein is coming up, and that's a completely different endeavor. And if you don't like that one, then there's zombie movie. Like we tried to, within the confines of it being like what it was, we wanted to make sure that there was something for everybody, and we knew that not everyone was going to like everything. And I think that's what people have embraced with Creepshow now. That look, sometimes it's a hit, sometimes it's a miss, but there's going to be another one, and we'll try it again.
Yeah. Actually, Solarama is one when I was looking for Nights of Badass last night, I saw it was on Amazon Prime as well. So I'm going to try to check.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
My God. Oh, can't wait for that sweet Amazon Prime subscription that they give as residuals. It's going to be awesome.
I was going to ask about that. In this modern day, Mayhem would probably be considered your biggest success. I would have to say, correct?
I would definitely say so.
How are you able? I don't know how to word this. It doesn't sound stupid.
No, please. I say stupid shit all the time.
Financially speaking, are you? Do you do pretty well? Now, I'm not saying you're a millionaire, but I'm saying does it work to be in the business for you?
As long as you know that you're going to have to do multiple jobs until until there's a point where you don't. I know that's probably the most terrible answer ever, but
no, I get what you're saying.
I got in this business from a creative standpoint, wanting to know how to shoot, wanting to know how to edit, wanting to know how to write, not just I wanted to be a director, but I also wanted to enrich my experience by knowing how to do that. I didn't realize until maybe when I first moved out here that those skill sets were going to be the thing that was going to just keep me surviving here. When I first moved out to LA, I started DPing stuff for shows and or doing editing jobs. And because they're when you're on Mandy or you're on these job sites and you put in director, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be the thing that you want, or even writer. The writer jobs come few and far in between, but there's a lot of shooting gigs and there's a lot of producing gigs and there's a lot of editing gigs. So those skill sets have essentially been the things that kept me afloat and still do in many respects. When it comes to the movies, yes, the world has completely changed. My first film was Wrong Turn 2. And that was at on the tail end of the lucrative DVD home video market. That said, I still get residual checks from that movie all the time because it plays on TV all the time, and it does very well on VOD, which is awesome. Now counterbalance that with Point Blank. Now, like you were saying, oh yeah, Mayhem's your maybe your biggest movie. I don't know if that's true because Point Blank had a global reach of in the first 10 days, it had a global reach of 25 million people, which that's I can almost guarantee there's more people who saw Point Blank in that 10 days than maybe at the time people saw Mayhem. I think Mayhem has definitely evolved because of both Steven and Samara, becoming the huge stars that they are. This past year with the pandemic, people started watching Mayhem again. It's great. I love it. I love the fact that there was no way that it was going to register at all on the box office when it came out in 100 theaters because of a contractual obligation. It did much better when it was on Shudder and much better when it was on VOD. So it's harder to gauge that level of success. But to answer your question, you just have to be able to wear a lot of hats as a filmmaker, and know that, if you want to be a filmmaker, if you want to be a director, there's a good chance that there's not going to be enough work unless you are lucky or hit the ground running and get a really good deal from the beginning. You're not going to be able to sustain yourself. You're not going to be able to support yourself. Now, I'm sure there's some people who are well, I have. Great. I wish I had your gumption. But for me, I've had to pay my dues and I've had to feed my family through other work for years, and still to this day, I'm, some of the stuff that I do in between projects, would not be construed as like, oh, it's the next Joe Lynch joint, like, no,
Right.
like, for example, I direct English dubs for Netflix sometimes, and it's a fucking great job. I love it. I'm still working with actors, and I'm still like making creative decisions, even though we're kind of worked into a box. But I love it, and it keeps me frosty. I get to be able to do some of the things that I've learned as a director in that skill set. But I also, because of editing, I know how to work that skill set too. So, it's because for years, I've always wondered when I was growing up and reading Premiere Magazine and Movie Line and, obsessing over all these directors and sometimes going like, boy, it's been 2 or 3 years since Peter Hyams has done a movie. Like, what's he up to? Steven Soderbergh, like what happened to Steven Soderbergh after Kafka, then before Out of Sight? People didn't know that he was a script doctor or he was an editor, like we all have to work. It's just that like, we're unfortunately in a higher profile position where sometimes every move you make career wise is a news thing. And it makes you go, oh shit, like, is this not newsworthy for me to take this editing gig or this DP job? Like Jamie Blanks, for example, the director of Urban Legend and Valentine, there's a guy that for years I've been sitting there going, what the fuck happened to Jamie? I really liked his work. And you don't realize that he's been this very successful editor and very successful composer on some of your favorite docs and some of your favorite special features. Like, he works and he's not starving, and he's supporting a family. And that's what we all have to remember, is that like, there is a life outside of the red carpet and the commentary track and going like, oh yes, I have a stack of scripts on my desk. You know what? In most cases, there's not a fucking desk. Like I always hated that. Like, oh man, I got all these scripts on my desk. I'm like, no, they're PDFs in your email, and you're just avoiding reading them. But yeah, like it's been a rough ride sometimes, but at the same time, like I've been really lucky with where I've been able to kind of steer things. There's been ups and downs, but that's every career. But I've learned from each one of those, and it's been especially beneficial. Like with Creepshow, I had done 2 shows before, but even before that, I had worked very low budget indie films. So I know what it's like to have to make your day and be as prepared as possible before you even step on set. All of these things helps when you have that gun to your head and you're told, okay, you got 12 hours to get this day, and you have 12 days to get, or 12 to 16 days to get this movie. You can't just sit there with your thumb up your ass taking selfies on set going like, oh, okay, this is what a director does. No, you have to do the work. You have to put in the time and pay your dues. So yeah, that's the long-winded answer.
Right. Well, I guess what I was getting at before with the Mayhem probably being your biggest is from like a reception standpoint. I think. I mean, I know point blank. Hell, I was before anything was announced. I was on set in Atlanta with Joe when he was doing Boss Level. Boss Level. Yeah. He goes, dude, you're not going to believe who we got, for Point Blank. And I'm like, who? And he goes, with Joe Lynch, Mayhem. And I'm like, oh, that's really fucking cool. And it was like, oh, sweet. It's one of those surreal things. Like, number one, I can't believe I'm on a movie set. And I'm hanging out with a famous director. But number two, I just got a juicy bit of information that I can't do anything with because I didn't have anything going on at the time like this. And I don't do that sort of thing anyway. So, but I was like, wow, that's impressive that I got to have a really special day on set in Atlanta. That's awesome. Fun, yeah. And I was actually going to try to come out because I had gotten to know Adam after that. I was actually going to try to come out for Point Blank because I'm outside of Chicago and Cincinnati is a hell of a lot closer than Atlanta was. Oh yeah. But I never made it out, and I started following you on like Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or something, and you guys looked like you were having a blast making that one. It was a whirlwind going through that, and especially like working with those guys, especially Mackie. Like I could watch that guy like read a telephone book.
he's the best. You know, like we had such a great experience with that. But yeah, like it's like with Mayhem, the reception was shocking to me because it was my up until this point, it was definitely my most personal film. At the time, here's a good way to kind of bring it back to what we were talking before. You know, in between Everly and eventually Mayhem, I was working a desk job producing promos for Esquire Network and hating life. I was like, what have I done? Like what has gotten me here?
Yeah,
and then
Esquire Network was kind of cool for a minute. They had that really good show, I think, Knife Fight.
Yeah. Oh my God, I worked on that. Yep.
That was actually a good show. I was really bummed. It disappeared.
I did promos for that. You know. Yeah. Well, what's funny is that the evolution of that channel was it was originally G4. And then when G4 kind of dissolved because they were saying no one watches TV on or games on TV, not realizing Twitch was coming. Right. They wanted to turn it into the bespoke gentleman's network, but a lot of the same people who worked for G4 migrated over to Esquire, and I was one of them. And you know, I was lucky that I had that job, and the people that I worked with were great, but it was still a corporate situation that I'm not that type. So a lot of that stress, and a lot of my anger towards that whole paradigm. When I got the script for Mayhem, where it fell on my desk, it hit me in a way that I never expected. And you know, like when people say, "Oh, it's my most personal film," I'm sure somebody watches and goes like, "This was his most personal film," but when you've been through the trenches of the corporate world, like I have, and like Derek's character was, there is definitely, like, there's so many moments, like just hearing "let's discuss," that still gives me PTSD when I hear that or read that in an email where you're just like, oh God, because you know how passive aggressive that bullshit is. Yeah. So, you know, like to see how Mayhem has become, you know, the type of movie that like people have really resonated with, or that they're making VHS versions of it, or, you know, hearing from, what was it? I was just talking to Adam Simon, and he was telling me how he has a relationship right now with RZA, and I'm a huge Wu-Tang fan.
Yes, I know about that too. I've been waiting for this.
So you can't talk about it, but you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
He was talking to RZA, and RZA was like, "Oh man, I love Mayhem," and it's like, what? Like RZA's seen my shit. Like when Mayhem came out on Shudder, because again, I'm still in this weird mindset that I've always been in, that no one watches my stuff. Like no one's seen my crap, you know, like I make it for me. And this is not how I feel, but like, I always think like I'm making it for me and my buddies and my mom, because those are usually the people that say like, "Hey, good job. I really like that." Or like, "Oh, Joey, you did so well." But to hear people that are your heroes, like when Mayhem came out on Shudder, and a week later, Stephen King tweeted about it. I was on a playground in Venice with my kids, and I read it, and I passed out. I really passed out. I was just like, oh God!
You had the vapors.
He's my hero. Yes, I'm like, oh, I got the King vapors. I mean, he's my hero. And like, that's the thing, like working on Creepshow is like, in a way, like my way of going like, thank you. Because I would have never gotten Creepshow without, I think, Mayhem. I don't know. But yeah, like it's something that I'm still very proud of. I'm so glad that people are still talking about it. I think that like the toxicity of corporate life is something that maybe has changed because of the pandemic, but people are still very passive aggressive. There's still someone who's stealing your mug, whether it's at home now or at the office. And you know, to have that resonate with people on a much bigger level than I ever expected is really, really gratifying.
Yeah, I've got it. I bought it on Vudu, but I know I really want to get the Blu-ray, because the Blu-ray looks kick-ass.
Yeah, I mean, either that or like Shudder has 3 versions of it now. On,
oh, no kidding.
They have the movie, they have because we did a director's commentary for Mayhem on the Blu-ray, which is me, the DP, Steve Gaynor. I believe Josh Ethier is on that as well, the editor. But then for Shudder, because I was like, I don't understand how hard it is to do director's commentaries on streaming. It's really not that difficult. I did stuff like that at Esquire, where I was playing with like different tracks on audio when it goes to streaming services, like on our site. And like, it's not that hard to do. So what if, and I just went to Shudder and said, like, what if Steven and I sat down and recorded one? Would you accept it? They're like, sure. So so there's a director's commentary with Steven Yeun and myself on Shudder. And then Joe Bob Briggs did it last year on The Last Drive-In, which was
it's awesome.
Which was surreal because I grew up with Joe Bob, and and we had become friendly to the point where like 2 hours before it aired, because it's supposed to be a secret, 2 hours before, he let me know, and he's like, "Let's have a little fun on Twitter. Let's go back and forth and call each other assholes." I'm like, okay. And I guess it was convincing enough where I had a bunch of trolls coming after me, like, how dare you like attack Joe Bob? He is a national treasure and you're a fucking hack. And I'm like, guys, easy. At the same time going, fuck you, Joe Bob, because like he's talking about the commentary track on there and goes like, all Joe's doing is talking about his flatulence. I'm like, well, to be fair, it's actually Steven who's talking about his flatulence. And screw you, Joe Bob. It's like, people are just so sensitive these days. And oh God, it was hilarious. Like even today, people are like, hey, remember that time that Joe Bob and Joe Lynch got into a fight on Twitter? I'm like, oh my God, really? That's the unfortunate, one of the unfortunate things about Twitter is that there's no
sarcasm.
There's no way to exactly. Like I wish that someone could adopt italics as when you're being sarcastic. Or like put a fucking ampersand before and after or something, like a star or something like, yes, we're being sarcastic. Like you don't have to jump down our throats because you don't hear
you're not gonna sit there and
the particular way we say it.
You're not gonna JK every time.
Oy.
Well, let me ask you, I got a couple more questions and I'll
sure.
let you go. First off, I mean, let's just talk about the fact that you put Steven Yeun as a lead in a film, and now, I mean, he is blown up like crazy. Best actor, he's up for that next week. I mean, and then he was so good in Burning. The Burning was a film I absolutely loved, but I loved him in it. I thought it was a little too long, a little too ponderous, but
every time he shows up, smoldering.
Yeah, he's really good, and it's just fascinating to see him evolve from The Walking Dead to Mayhem to Burning to now, Oscar-nominated actor. And he had a very interesting thing he said in The Hollywood Reporter, which did a whole cover story on Minari, where he basically doesn't like the idea of having, the first Asian American actor for lead role Oscar now. He doesn't want to have that burden on him because he wants to be able to. He doesn't want to be seen in the rear view mirror because that kind of stuff just stops careers. Mm-hmm. And I guess with everything going on right now, with a friend of mine posted this shitty person that was driving around Chinatown with something about the China virus, the China American flag, and just driving around where Asian people are and all the attacks and everything. I'm not really sure where my question is exactly, but I mean, how important is it that Steven is becoming such a
iconic
person? Yeah.
Well, first off, the reason why I hired Steven was not because of his race at all. Right. The part was written for a Caucasian man.
Well, you could definitely see producers being against the idea, probably.
Well, thankfully, I was lucky enough where two things happened. One, three things. One, I got the list, and I'm like, and it honestly bored me. I was like, it's all these fucking white guys. Coming from a white guy myself, I was like, the thing is, like, I grew up in a working class town in Long Island, and my dad customized cars, and I learned a very important lesson about race relations, if you will. And some people might see this as crude, and my apologies in advance. We put that out there, but in the auto world, people can be very casually racist. Sure. There was a time where my dad had customers who were white, who were black, who were Asian, who were Indian, Hispanic. Everybody loved to get their cars tricked out. And my dad accommodated everybody with a smile and was that was his thing. He was very cool to everybody. And I worked with him up in the shop. And one day these guys who I would almost safely guarantee they were in the mob. So if anything, that's probably putting an idea in your head that they're probably a bunch of extras from Sopranos. There I go profiling. But they came in and they were just walking around doing their thing. And then a bunch of African-American guys come in and they got some stuff done. And after they left, the one of the guys in the Sopranos extras came over to my dad and said oh man, so you deal with the N-word? And my dad's yeah, so? And he shut him down immediately. And he didn't say this, but then after, when he left, my dad's look, I have no biases when it comes to this business and my clientele, because everybody pays green and bleeds red. Right. And there was something about that really resonated with me. And it's something that has always informed the way that I watch movies, especially again, my first movie was Dawn of the Dead. And to me, Ken Faree is the hero of that movie. Right. And, that's always just been in the back of my head. That's why with Wrong Turn 2, I made a point, in a way, and I was shrewd too, because it was based on the conventions that you're usually used to in these movies. The black actor usually, says some funny lines and then dies at the most 2/3 of the way through the film. That's just the way it goes. Right. It's become a stereotype. Right. Yeah. Or just so many movies, especially slasher films we've seen. There's the funny African-American character who, ends up saying that's whack and then gets dispatched. And you've never, in most cases from my filmmaking or filming viewing going, I very rarely saw the black actor, the black character live to the end. And I was we got to do that, even if it's just something that the audience won't see coming. But it was something that I was very important to get behind. And then with Everly, for example, here's this Spanish actress, or I'm sorry, Latina actress, Selma Hayek, who's the lead of the movie, and everybody else in the film is Japanese, so I like having melting pot films. So, that's why I think I flinched a little when I saw that list. But then that weekend was the weekend, when they were all right, let's think of some more ideas. And that was the weekend that Glenn, if you're familiar with The Walking Dead at all, yes. It was the fake out death, the one where he falls off the dumpster and everything gets ripped apart and everything. And I remember thinking, holy shit, because I remember my Twitter feed was freaking out, and I was freaking out because I was oh my God, it's Glenn. How could they do this? And because I was still in this weird mindset of who are our everymen these days? Who are the guys that can play the working class, who can be representative of the everyman? And I used to always call it the Richard Dreyfuss, because for a very long time, that was Richard Dreyfuss's role in a lot of movies. Everything from obviously Jaws, to The Goodbye Girl, and then even Let It Ride or something like that. He was just the average Joe. And I was there's not too many of. Yeah. Oh, I love that movie. It's on. It's been forever. I believe it's on. Watch it again, dude. It's fucking nuts. It's probably the craziest mix of Preston Sturges and Sam Raimi. Yeah, no, I remember liking it, and it died. It was one of those we'll bury it in August movies. Oh, it was the lowest grossing film of the summer of 1989. I remember that specifically, but it was on HBO every other day. so I watched it incessantly. But Richard Dreyfuss was, to me, a perfect example of an everyman. And being a fan of Stevens from The Walking Dead, I was like, what if? And it just so happened that his agent called Circle of Confusion and pitched him, and we just went, what if? Now, Circle of Confusion also produced The Walking Dead. So they already had a relationship with Steven. It wasn't like I had to go in there and go, what about Steven Yeun? And they're like, who? They were like, oh my God, what if?
Well, that's serendipity right there.
And honestly, it was just a conversation that he and I had. I was at Esquire at the time when I had to take the phone call and go into a broom closet, thinking it was only going to be a 20-minute call during my lunchtime. It ended up being 2.5 hours that we were on the phone together. No, I mean, I was sitting there going, oh my God, I'm going to get in so much trouble because I'm not there like in the edit right now, finishing up my promo for fucking Knife Fight. But we connected on a level that because I mean, you know, he has every right to talk about like what's his perspective going into this.
Right.
And I had said at one point, I'm like, I don't want to make your ethnicity a thing because I like, and it's not to bemoan or not to downplay, you know, the importance of that. But I think the less we talk about it, that Derek got fired for reasons that weren't like, even if the boss had said like, I'm not allowed to fire you because of, you know, your ethnicity, that would get me in trouble or something like that. I think at some point someone even pitched putting that in there and we're like, no, like we don't want to talk about that at all. Right. Let it just play out organically that Derek is American and this American in this shitty situation. If we start bringing race into it and force it onto the audience, there's going to be a contingent of people that might get turned off. And we've gotten our share of criticism for that, but I still think that Steven and I would agree that like we stand on that it's better to allow the audience to make those interpretations. I mean, he's on screen, you know what he looks like.
It says everything without saying anything.
It's exactly. So why beat a dead horse? Like let's rather beat around the bush, if you will, and just let it organically unfold for the audience. And I'm so proud of him. It's like when you watch him in that movie, and I got to watch it on screen, or even before when we were in rehearsals, or like on the day, you sit there and sometimes you go, that guy's a fucking movie star, man. Holy shit. And I've done that to other actors too, you know, like that I've worked with, where I'm like, man, they just have star power, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, even out in Serbia, you know, in a basement of an office building, and you're watching like Steven and Samara spitting on each other. I just remember going, A, I want to make 5 more movies with these two. B, one, if not both of these two are going to likely be very, very big stars. Just a chemistry that they had together and apart. You get that Barton Fink feeling where you go like, there's something there and I can't quite tell what it is, but it's there. And I mean, I'm honestly not surprised at all with the accolades that Steven's gotten, because he's also very smart and he's taking chances with his choices that have paid off tenfold. Like if he had not done Burning, I don't think he would have done Minari. And if he didn't do Minari, I don't think we would be enjoying what his choices are now. You know, like I could not be happier for them both. But yeah, I called it. I called it way back when.
All right. Well, I got 2 quick questions, and then I'll let you go. One is the recent announcement of Arclight and Pacific Theaters closing. That's gonna be. I know in LA everybody seems to love.
It's brutal, dude. It's fucking brutal. It was like a gut punch when they announced that.
But I mean, somebody's got to end up taking over, like Cinerama Dome or something, right? I mean, it's someone's going to swoop in and be like, I've saved cinema. You know, someone's going to take advantage. I mean, of that. There's a few. Yeah, I know there's during this whole pandemic, the one company that was probably the best off was Marcus, which is, I don't know if where all they're at there. I think they're Southern and they're here in the Midwest. but Marcus owned like all of their real estate, so they were in a better position to say like AMC or I presume Arclight, where they had, you know, they owned their property, so they didn't have to worry about paying rent on nothing. You know, so it'd be nice to see somebody bigger take over that stuff and then keep a certain, because you know, even Alamo is having its own problems, and that just started expanding. So yeah. Is that was a gut punch then?
It was rough. I mean, part of the reason why I moved out here to LA was the movie theaters. And I had heard about the Cinerama Dome. This is before the Arclight opened up. And of course, the New Beverly and the New Art and the Egyptian. Like that's part of the reason why I haven't like already left were those theaters and the experience and the people that go and the community that like fosters it. And obviously the programming, you know, you don't get repertory programming everywhere in the world. If you're lucky, maybe a few college towns, New York, you know, like I'm from New York, but even still, like I would, up until a certain point, I would take LA theaters because there's just so many of them and they're all shriveling up. You know, the mom and pops are pretty much gone. And, you know, like, yes, for every AMC and Pacific that you out here or Cinemark, you know, it's unfortunate that a lot of the smaller places like the one on Beverly and obviously, you know, trying to think, there was another theater that like the Vista, you know, like the Vista is, you know, hanging on by a thread supposedly. But these are places that have become part of the allure of LA. And, you know, Cinerama Dome is the first, I think it's the first, it was the first movie theater that I went to see a movie in LA, which was 1 hour photo. But it was, you know, and I have so many memories of that theater. Actually, the last movie that I saw before the pandemic hit was at the Cinerama Dome. It was The Invisible Man, which was great.
Yeah.
I hope that someone or some entity, so to speak, because I think everyone's like pointing and looking at Quentin right now, going like,
I thought the same thing.
You helped out the new Bev. What about
the Cinerama Dome?
Yeah, you know, like Quentin that shouldn't be on Quentin's shoulders.
No, I get that, but that would be pretty sweet.
Oh my God! Like, I mean, if he ended up being like on a board of multiple investors that put money towards it, great. At least you know.
You can imagine what would be put on at the center. He would put on the legendary cuts, the CinemaScope stuff. And
most of my favorite movie experiences at the Cinerama Dome were repertory movies. Like I think because they would, you know, Arclight, even though they were owned by Pacific, which is a bigger conglomerate, they still had a lot of respect for older films and would program older films all the time. And when you can watch the Terminator, the original Terminator, front row center, like at the Cinerama Dome, it's a surreal experience. Like it's amazing. I know a lot of people don't like the curve. I love the curve. I'm all about the curve.
We used to have in Chicago. We used to have we've got two old school theaters now. We
have the Music Box, right?
We have the Music Box, which, even though they've upgraded a lot, their seats suck. I'm sorry to say, it's the most uncomfortable theater in the world. We've got the Tivoli, which is a very old, probably, you know, was a performing place in Downers Grove, which has a huge screen. We used to have McClure Court, which was basically Plitt Theater, if you remember back to Plitt, or Cineplex, I forget which one it was, but they had two theaters at the base, the entrance level, then you go downstairs to this massive 70 millimeter screen, curved screen. That shut down.
Oh man!
We used to have near where I'm at now. I think it was Cineplex had a two theater. They used to have, like, in this mall area, they had 4 different theaters, and one place had 6 screens. One had, then the other ones were 2 each. But the one of the 2 ones had this giant curved screen, and this was the 70s and 80s. They had red recliner leather chairs.
Wow.
And they had giant curtains, and the place was a palace. It was a true.
Well, that's when movies were given and moviegoers were given the kind of respect before it was almost McDonaldized. And as much as I loved the experience of going to a multiplex when the screens got smaller and there were more theaters like put in, which is based purely on greed and demand. Like they wanted to put out as many, versions of Lethal Weapon 2 and as many screens as possible at that time. Well, we need a multiplex to do that. We can't do it with a mom and pop. We can't do it with an old movie palace. And I think things started changing for a little bit, especially when like people found out, or like analyzers found out, that like people want to go to the movies and kind of do all of it instead of going from their house to a restaurant and then to the movie theater and all of that like separate expenses. So that's why places like the Alamo Drafthouse started to become affluent, because it's like we can do everything in one space. Like there was like, I wouldn't call it gimmicky, but there was a newfound respect for the theatrical experience before the pandemic like went away, that I'm hoping will come back. Yeah. Thankfully, like with the Alamo Drafthouse, which to me is my favorite of all the chains. The one in LA just opened up like last year.
Right before, yeah.
Right. We on the Movie Crypt, the podcast I do with Adam Green, we did a screening of God Bless America with Bobcat, Joel Murray, and Tara Barr. They were all there, and it was the night that Trump got on and said like, "Oh yeah, it's real," and that like we thought no one was going to show up because it was one of those like almost near panic moments that everyone's like, "Oh my God, what's going to happen next?" But that was really like, that was truly the final experience that I had, because that was kind of work for me. Because we had to do the intro, the outro, and all that. But it was just weird to go like, this may be the last time I eat a fried pickle in a movie theater anytime soon. God damn it, this sucks. Yeah, but I hope it comes back. I really do.
I mean, I do appreciate, like, one thing AMC has done that I appreciate is that they started building more of the Dolby cinemas.
Oh yeah, dude! I just saw
those are killer
on Dolby Cinema. Holy crap! I also will. I do admit, I want to support local theaters as much as possible. At the same time, I don't have a lot of money to be able to spend on movies these days. But having like the AMC card where you can watch like 3 movies a week, like that shit pays for itself. At least for me, that shit pays for itself per month. The second time I've gone, and I've already been to the movies 4 times this month. So like, and to be able to cancel when you can't make it, or be able to get the discount on the popcorn and all that. It's like, at least they're trying to get people to come back. So I know it will. I know it will, because I mean, look at Kong versus Godzilla, or Godzilla versus Kong, whichever you want to call it. I think everybody was really watching very closely and very nervous, like how much of the box office is going to be taken by home viewing. And I'm sure that they could look at that and go, well, yeah, there was a sizable amount, but there were still a lot of people who showed up for that movie.
Considering safe, distancing, and you have to,
even with the 25%,
it's made almost 400 million already.
So I think it's proof positive that people still do want that communal experience. Sure. There will always be streaming now. It's the same age-old discussion that media has had over this kind of distribution system since the 50s, when TV was going to ruin the cinematic experience. But look what happened with that. That's why that's why technology helped out in making what is it? Not Technicolor. God damn it! I'm gonna be pissed that I don't even know this. CinemaScope.
Okay.
Like the 70 millimeter, or yes, they were gimmicks to some degree, or 3D. Like there's always going to be a way for us to present these films aside from sitting home, turning on the TV, watching it passively. You're looking at your phone, you're looking, you're going for pee breaks. I mean, there is nothing better than to be able to shut off my phone, let the lights turn down, and I get lost in that world for 90 minutes to 2 hours. I'm not, unless I'm like my phone's blowing up and there's an emergency or something like that. I try to tune out and give the kind of respect that I would hope someone did with my movies. Now, I've only had two. Well, I mean, if you don't count like festivals, I haven't had many films that have gone theatrical.
Yeah.
But there's still, I would hope that when someone watches Mayhem or Everly or Point Blank or even like these Creepshow episodes, like I'm hoping that they're going to watch it and not sit there and, live tweet or something like that. I had somebody, I'm sure who both of us know, who's on Twitter a lot, who's tweeting me about or like DMing me about watching the episode of Creepshow. And they're asking all these questions. I'm like, why don't you watch it? And then we'll talk about it afterwards. I can't stand that. Like just watch the movie the way that people intended for you to be told a story without having a stop and start and stop and start. It fucking drives me nuts.
Well,
and that's part of the theatrical experience.
Yeah, take pleasure in the fact that you may not. I mean, there are films like I'll give a recent experience. I watched. I was sent a press streaming thing for Warner Brothers for Wonder Woman 1984, and I remember watching the first hour. I'm going, what in the fuck is happening in this film? I'm like, I was all set to say it was the worst superhero film of all time, and then all of a sudden, like in the second half, it ramps up into being really interesting and really cool. I'm like, I gotta be honest, I still have a million questions on why they made all the decisions they made. But I'm glad that I was able to sit there and say, well, you're going to stick with it to the end.
If you had paid your $20 and paid for parking, you were like, it's very rare. I still think, I hope, I wonder that people just walk out of movies because they casually just go, meh. Like it's easier to go, meh, with your remote than it is to go, I kind of invested in this. It's 90 minutes to 2 hours long. Like I got to see how this plays out. I've done that so many times with movies where at first I'm watching it and going like, I don't know, man. But then all of a sudden something clicks because you're focused on it, because the filmmakers made an intentional choice, whether to drag out the tone or hit you right from the beginning, and hopefully it doesn't tire you out.
Yeah.
It's
That's
hard.
the thing with people. That's the thing with people now. It's like they produce, and producers know that. They know that they're making. They're like, you got to have everything you got to have everything in the first 5-10 minutes.
Yeah.
To set everything up.
I've had those conversations before.
And
trust me.
It's like, come on. Like nobody's going to be talking. Maybe everything's solved. Everything's figured out in the first 5 or 10 minutes. But nobody's going to be talking about this damn thing. You want people to talk about it, and like. Rewatch it, have it go to wherever, for streaming and live on and sell Blu-rays, and if anybody even buys those anymore, whatever,
I thought, it's funny, like I remember when Justice League was about to come out, and there was at one point they were talking about it being cut up into like 4 installments.
Right.
And for something that weighty in terms of Justice League, like we would have never gotten a 4-hour cut if it went theatrical. That's just pure math. It like no one would have, unless it was like a very limited run, like the movie that I'm about to bring up, with the clout that filmmaker has. It more likely than not, we would have been forced to watch a 2-hour version of it, which was or wasn't Zach's original intent. Now we have that 4-hour version.
Yeah, he had the 2-hour. He had the 2-hour limit no matter what. That was their limit.
But the fact that he had the ability to have an outlet that would allow him a 4-hour version, but I still thought, like, I got to admit, like, it took me a couple times to watch that movie. Like it was a lot to take in.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, look at what Tarantino did with Hateful Eight. That was an incredibly long movie that it was broken up with an intermission, was shot on 70 millimeter, which were already making it a very limited way for distribution and exhibition. But then when it came out on Netflix as a 4 installment piece. Like, I love that movie to begin with. Like, anytime that Tarantino wants to make like Evil Dead meets Hellraiser in a Sergio Corbucci kind of setting, I'm in. But watching it like in those installments, I found things that I never would have before if I was just watching it unfold in that original version. So there are ways that filmmakers can lean into the modes of today in terms of storytelling. I heard that there was going to be a 4 or 5 hour version of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that was going to fit in that same model.
Yeah, I keep hoping that's a.
I hope. I really hope it is.
That's a movie I could live with for hours. And I like Hateful Eight, but I was a little down with it. I'm not a fan of Django Unchained, even though I'm liking it more as I watch it more, because no matter what, it's still a Tarantino movie. But of all of his films, Django's the one I have the most problem with from a storytelling standpoint. But regardless, and then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I saw it twice in the same day. And it's
perfection. Dude, I saw it at the Cinerama Dome. So it was the week before the movie came out, and they did a special screening of it. And my manager, one of my best friends, Luke, who's also my manager, like, we can explicate every Tarantino thing forever.
Yeah.
But we went together, and even that we were sitting like in the back didn't matter. I mean, the moment when lights turn on at the Cinerama Dome and you're in the Cinerama Dome, it was like Motley Crue just came on stage. It was like those moments that you see like in rock concerts where the lights go down and you just hear, "Whoa!" That was in a movie theater. Oh God, it was glorious. I love that movie so much.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I wasn't a big fan. Like my least favorite Tarantino movie, and I get shit for this all the time, is Jackie Brown. I still love it. I still absolutely love it. If Jackie Brown is like his worst movie to me, then like look at all the other movies that are sheer masterpieces. But I've grown to love it more because of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because I'm used to the Tarantino that is more plot based, that is messing around with structure and time, whereas Jackie Brown and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, at least the first half of it, they're what they call hangout movies, where they're just characters hanging out. You're soaking in their characters. There's nothing going on really in the movie. There's a couple things that are moving the plot along, but for the most part, it's a very relaxed version of his work, So, but like if they can have a 4-hour version of that, I would hang out with those people in that movie for days if they had the ability to do it.
That's
easily.
Exactly my feelings since the beginning. And Jackie Brown is one that I remember being a little unsure about when I first saw it, and I've only seen it probably 5 times. That's weird. I've saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood 5 times in the theaters. I've seen Jackie Brown 5 times. In the 20.
Oh, connection.
But each time I watch it, Jackie Brown, I end up loving it more and more. I still wish.
I agree. I've done the same thing recently where I'm like
more of the center, but.
Well, the problem is that when the movie came out, it came off of Pulp Fiction, which was this zeitgeist phenomenon. No matter what he was going to come out with next, it was going to be scrutinized incessantly. And I remember being in film school, seeing it a week before the movie came out, because they had like preview passes, and I'm giving out posters and everything, and everybody's covering it. Everyone's wearing their Kangol hats and shit. And I could not have been more excited for a movie because of how much of a fan I was of both Pulp and Reservoir Dogs, and obviously Natural Born Killers and True Romance. Like, I was a devotee. I was in. And I remember walking out going, it's not Andre Sakula, the DP, and he shot it in 1851, and it kind of looked very like boring in terms of the palette. And I just could not stop being disappointed over all the things that now I truly appreciate. It was just the expectation I had was I wanted Pulp Fiction 2. And I had even read Rum Punch, the Elmore Leonard novel that it was based on, going, oh man, and that book is jumping around in time, so he'll be jumping around in time. And he does it a little bit, but it didn't have the soundtrack I wasn't like that excited from, was it the Delphonics? Now I listen to those songs all the time and I love them. But at the time, again, it wasn't like, it didn't have the same kind of energy. It felt like where Pulp Fiction was a movie done with like coke. This movie felt like he had just smoked a couple blunts with Bridget Fonda sitting on the couch. That's what that movie is to me now. It's a weed movie. You know, it's like let's just hang out and watch beautiful women shooting machine guns.
It also focused on older people.
Yes,
which was another,
and then maybe that was something that I couldn't at the time relate to. Right. Now I can, which is crazy. But it was just a different type of movie that I expected from him. Yeah. And now looking back, based on the other films that he's made in his filmography, I see it as very deliberate. You know, whereas a lot of times filmmakers are kind of beholden to the offers that they get. You know, or there's a certain amount of orchestration of their filmography, but you look at everything that Quentin's done up until that point, and it feels like he went, and this is where my hangout movie has to be. Because then after that, then I can get real fucking crazy and do my martial arts film and do my, rape, revenge, violence ballet. And then I can do this, and this, and I can't not appreciate that. It's just sometimes when it comes to a filmmaker's filmography, you can't truly appreciate those things until you're kind of in the rear view and you can see it from like a hindsight perspective. But yeah, like he's just a master. Yeah.
So last question is, what are you working towards now?
Nothing I can unfortunately disclose at the moment. Luckily, I wish. Well, I can say this, or maybe I can't. Who knows? We'll see. But I had such a good time. I had such a good time on. I think this is kind of common knowledge at this point. Just don't make a news blast about it, if anything.
No. The interview is just the interview. So
I had a really good time on Creepshow. So much so that on my last day, they asked me to come back. So I was in Atlanta in January, February this past couple months, doing two more episodes for season 3. So awesome. And that I believe comes out in October. So if you put all 4 segments together, you kind of have a Joe Lynch Creepshow anthology. It's kind of cool. Cool. And I'm really proud of those 2 because they're also incredibly different than the ones I did before. So we're just finishing up those. There's a feature that I'm casting right now, and knock on wood, you never know when, if something's going to go until you're on set with your shot list, a gun to your head going, all right, people, we got to go. But that, if I'm lucky, that will be shot this July. And I'm crossing fingers because I'm really chomping at the bit to make another feature. I love doing TV. But this is a script that's really near and dear to my heart. It's another really personal one. I didn't write it, but one of my favorite screenwriters did. And it's a project that I've been attached to before, but then when I got Point Blank, I had to let it go. And then weirdly enough, it came back to me last year. And it was like one of those serendipitous moments where I'm like, maybe I was meant to make this movie. So crossing fingers, that's the next thing. And until then, porn, lots of porn.
Movie crypt, yeah.
Oh, of course, and that's what I meant by porn. But yes. No, and the movie crypt always keeps us busy. We have some amazing guests. We've been on a roll. I mean, that's another silver linings things with the whole pandemic is that people that we might not have normally been able to have on, like Anthony Mackie, or we had Abel Ferrara on last year.
Wow.
which was a dream come true.
I was trying to get him semi recently too.
Good luck. It was amazing. So yeah, we just had Larry Fessenden on last week, and he's one of my heroes too. So always staying busy with the movie crypt, and then just seeing where the wind takes me next.
Awesome. Well, make sure you when you have you're finalized with the film to put. I'm sure you will put something on social media, letting everybody.
Oh, of course, lots of hints and stuff like that.
All right,
you got it,
Joe. You gave me more than I thought we were going to get, and that's fantastic.
Sorry.
No. If you have a chance to look at what I've done so far, I like long conversations. This is a little.
Oh, I watched the Ben David episode, and I'm like, well, if Ben David can pontificate, then so can I. You know?
Yeah, awesome. I'm glad you saw it because I loved.
That was a great episode.
Again, the 2 degrees of Breckin Meyer.
Yeah,
whatever.
It was funny because Ben David, when it got announced, he was like, "Holy shit, you're working with Breckin?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Get ready for shadow boxing." I'm like, "What does that mean?" He's like, "In between takes, Breckin would like shadow box and like for his part in Happily." So I expected that, and weirdly enough, Breckin didn't do it at all. It was fucking Quentin in the background doing the fucking shadow boxing. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? I don't know what the shadow boxing thing is, but whatever gets them into the moment, that works for me.
Awesome.
But yeah, there's
I appreciate you checking out the Ben David one. Then that's great. I appreciate that.
I can listen to Ben David talk for days as well. He's definitely like me, where he'll go off on tangents, and we talk a lot about movies that a lot of times people don't like to talk about. But that's the beauty of cinema, is that one man's Battleship Potemkin is another man's MacGruber.
That's a perfect way to end. All right, Joe. Well, thank you very much. Good luck. Hopefully we get to talk again, and just keep being safe.
Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you later. Bye.